Have you ever stopped to think about some new technology, maybe it's AI or, the latest automation in a factory, and just wondered, is this really here to free us up, or is it just making our work lives more intense?
It often feels like that, doesn't it? A real double-edged sword.
Yeah. And for you listening, trying to get your head around these huge societal shifts with all the information flying around, well, it can be tough. Today, we want to try and cut through some of that noise.
We do, and we're going to do it by taking a deep dive into the thinking of Karl Marx, especially from his massive work, Capital, or O Capital, as it's titled in the sources we looked at.
Right, capital.
And it's kind of amazing how his ideas about technology and labor and capital itself, written way back in the 19th century, still seem to echo so strongly today.
Absolutely. So for this deep dive, we've drawn on some contemporary interpretations, people looking at Marx now, but also gone right back to excerpts from Capital itself. Now, it could be a dense read, let's be honest.
Oh, definitely. It's not light reading.
But it's incredibly rewarding when you grasp the core arguments. So, our mission here is to unpack what Marx was really seeing in the capitalism, especially its link with the technology. We'll pull out some surprising facts, connect his thinking to things you experience daily, like automation, the global economy.
And help you get a handle on these foundational ideas that really underpin so many debates we're having right now.
Exactly. Think of it as your shortcut to being genuinely well-informed,
Mm.
getting those sort of aha moments.
Okay, so to start, maybe we should just briefly sketch out Marx's journey, intellectually speaking.
Good idea. Where did he start?
Well, he began very much in Hegelian idealism. That's a philosophy where ideas, consciousness are seen as the main drivers of reality.
Right.
But Marx wasn't satisfied with that. He moved towards a materialist view, the idea that it's actually material conditions, economic activity that shapes society. He famously wrote about seeking the idea in reality itself.
So moving from abstract ideas to concrete reality?
Precisely. You even see hints of this early on, like in his doctoral thesis on ancient Greek philosophers. He was already trying to push beyond the existing ways of thinking.
And he wasn't just a thinker, he was a critic, a polemicist even. I'm thinking of his response to Proudhon.
Ah, yes, The Poverty of Philosophy in 1847. That was a really sharp critique of Proudhon's philosophy of misery.
And that marked a big shift for him, didn't it, towards the labor theory of value?
It did. That's where he fully embraces the idea, building on economists like Ricardo, that the value of something comes from the labor needed to produce it. And that becomes absolutely central to Capital.
Which brings us to the big one, Capital, Volume 1, published 1867. You said it wasn't just economics.
No, far from it. It was, incredibly ambitious. He was trying to weave together political economy with sociology, history, demography, you name it, a kind of unified social science.
Wow.
He wasn't just asking what happens in the economy, but why it happens and how it shapes society, history, people's actual lives.
So it's economics, but with the human story baked right in. He saw capitalism itself as having a history like it arises, it develops.
And it creates the conditions for its own potential disappearance. That's key. It's not some timeless natural system in his view. It's a specific historical phase.
How does that make his approach different from, say, modern economics?
Well, the sources stress his approach isn't economicist. He doesn't put the economy in a separate box.
Oh.
For him, it's woven into everything: culture, politics, social relations. They all influence the economy, and the economy influences them right back. It's all interconnected.
That makes sense. Now, reading Marx, Capital specifically, can seem daunting. Our sources mention two kinds of difficulties people face. The first is ideological or political.
Yes, and it's described as absolute and massively determining. It's quite a striking phrase.
What does it mean practically?
Well, the argument is if you've directly experienced exploitation within the system Marx describes, the book just speaks to your reality. It clicks.
Mm-hmm.
But for others, maybe those more insulated from that or, more influenced by dominant ideologies, engaging with Marx requires a real break, a kind of revolution in consciousness, as the source puts it.
A revolution in consciousness.
Yeah.
That sounds intense and
Yeah.
probably a big barrier for many people just wanting to understand his ideas.
It can be. And then there's the second difficulty, which is more straightforwardly theoretical.
Just the fact that it's dense academic writing.
Exactly. It's challenging for anyone not used to that style, whatever their background. But that's sort of why we're doing this deep dive, right? To bridge those gaps.
Precisely, to make the abstract a bit more concrete and show why it might still matter to you today.
And we really can't talk about Marx completing Capital without mentioning Friedrich Engels. His role was absolutely crucial.
How so?
Well, first, materially. Engels provided financial support that basically allowed Marx to dedicate years and years to research and writing.
Right, that practical side is often overlooked.
Hugely important. But also, Engels was Marx's champion. He worked tirelessly to get Marx's ideas noticed, fighting against what they saw as a conspiracy of silence. And after Marx died, Engels edited and published volumes 2 and 3 of Capital from Marx's notes.
So, a true intellectual and practical partnership.
Absolutely essential. Without Engels, our picture of Marx's work would be incomplete.
Okay, so we have this framework. Marx's materialist view, Capital as this huge interdisciplinary analysis, and the challenges in reading it. How did he then apply this to technology, machinery specifically?
Well, this is where it gets really fascinating. Marx observed something quite stark, that capitalists explicitly saw machinery as, and I quote loosely here, the most powerful weapon to repress strikes.
A weapon, not just a tool for efficiency.
He argued it was both, but the control aspect was key. He even suggested someone could write a whole history of inventions since 1830 designed purely to give capital leverage against worker revolts.
That's a really provocative thought. Technology designed for social control within the factory. What were the immediate effects he saw?
Well, the obvious one is labor displacement. New machine comes in, some workers lose their jobs. Simple as that.
But does it end there?
Not entirely. Marx noted a couple of, let's call them counter tendencies, or compensatory tendencies. First, if the new machines boost profits enough, it might attract more capital into that industry, potentially increasing overall demand for labor in that sector down the line.
Okay, so maybe expansion offsets some job losses.
Potentially. And second, new machinery in one sector could increase demand in industries that supply it. Think about textile machines. Suddenly you need more metal workers, more coal miners.
Right, the feeding industries, as you called them earlier.
Exactly. Although, of course, those industries then get automated too, eventually. It's a continuous cycle.
And looking at the bigger picture, historically, these huge technological shifts, like the Industrial Revolution, they didn't initially shrink the working class, did they?
Quite the opposite. They massively expanded it. Think of all the agricultural workers pushed off the land by mechanization, flooding into cities to work in the new factories.
He has a specific, quite grim example in Capital linking technology to global consequences, doesn't he? About cotton.
Yes, it's very powerful. He connects the rapid advances in cotton spinning in England directly to the boom in cotton cultivation in the U.S.
Which meant
a horrific expansion of the slave trade from Africa, and even, as he puts it, made slave breeding a major business in the U.S. border states. It shows how technology in one place could fuel brutality and exploitation continents away.
Okay, now here's where it really hits close to home for us today. This current tech revolution, AI, automation feels just as big as the Industrial Revolution, maybe bigger.
It certainly has that potential, yes.
Now, the simple logic is that capitalists automate if it's cheaper than human labor. But our sources suggest it's more complex now, something about state support.
That's a key point from the contemporary analysis. Things like huge cash injections into banks after 2008 or big corporate tax cuts like the U.S. saw in 2017.
How does that change the automation calculation?
Well, it means major corporations end up sitting on vast piles of cash. The figure mentioned for U.S. corporations was around $1.9 trillion.
Wow.
So they could use that to hire more people or raise wages. But often, the incentive, maybe amplified by these policies, is to pour into automation instead. It becomes less about direct labor cost comparison and more about strategic investment of this huge capital pool.
And we're seeing concrete examples of this everywhere, aren't we? Logistics, for one.
Oh, absolutely. The logistics automation market has exploded, expected to grow from what? $46 billion in 2018 to over $80 billion by 2023. That's huge growth.
And Amazon is a major player there.
A leader, not just using automation, but developing it and selling it to their competitors. That gives them a massive edge.
And it's not just warehouses. We're seeing AI starting to replace radiologists, adaptive software used in education.
Teacher roles, yeah. The World Economic Forum prediction was stark: 30% of jobs potentially at risk of automation by 2030. Now, at risk doesn't mean gone.
But it means massive change, redefinition of roles, displacement.
Exactly. Huge shifts. And we shouldn't forget the global and environmental side of this.
Right, the demand for minerals.
Coltan, rare earths, often mined in the global south under appalling conditions, fueling our digital devices. And the energy consumption, the projection that data centers could use a fifth of Earth's energy by 2025. That's staggering.
It really is. Okay, let's shift gears slightly and unpack Marx's core idea of how capitalism actually works, how it generates profit. He talks about labor power.
Yes, labor power, it's a really central concept. He argues it's a unique commodity.
A commodity, like something you buy and sell.
Exactly. Workers sell their labor power, their ability to work, to the capitalist. What's unique is its use value. The act of using labor power, the actual working, creates new value.
Creates new value.
Okay.
And this leads to surplus value,
Yeah.
or more value, as the source sometimes translates it.
Right. Surplus value, or Mehrwert in German. It's the value the worker creates above and beyond the value of their own labor power, which is represented by their wage.
So the wage covers the cost of keeping the worker able to work, but the worker produces more than that cost.
Precisely. And that extra value, the surplus value, is where the capitalist's profit comes from. The sources say nothing costs the buyer, the capitalist, and yet realizes itself through the sale of commodities. It's generated by the worker during the part of the workday they aren't being paid for effectively.
He called this more work, right? Splitting the workday into necessary labor and surplus labor.
Yes. Necessary labor is the time needed to produce value equivalent to the worker's wage. Surplus labor is all the time worked beyond that, producing value solely for the capitalists.
And it's this surplus labor, this unpaid work time, that capitalists want to maximize.
Absolutely. That's the engine of accumulation. And one way to maximize it is what Marx called generating absolute surplus value. Simply making people work longer hours, extending the workday as much as possible.
And the examples from Capital on this are pretty brutal. The London bakers.
Shocking, really. Competition drove bakers to extract maybe 18 hours of work for 12 hours pay. He links this directly to things like bread adulteration and the need for exhausting night work. The system itself incentivized these practices.
And the human cost was just immense.
Yeah.
You mentioned the modiste, Marianne Walkley.
Died at 20 from, as the report at the time put it, simple overwork. Working 16.5 hours a day, sometimes 30 hours straight during the busy season, it's almost unimaginable.
Even skilled trades weren't immune, the blacksmith example.
Yeah, an ancient craft, an instinctive art, turned man-destroying by sheer overwork, cutting life expectancy drastically from maybe 50 down to 37.
And when attempts were made to regulate this, like limiting night work for children,
the factory owners fought back hard. Their argument, quoted by Marx, was blunt. Limiting child labor would mean each adult would lose half his profit. It shows how central that extended, often child labor was to their bottom line.
So extending the workday was one strategy. But eventually, laws like the Factory Act started to limit that, right?
Yeah.
Did capital just accept lower profits?
Not according to Marx. What's fascinating here is the shift. When extending the workday, absolute surplus value became harder. Capital focused on intensifying the work within the limited hours. This is relative surplus value.
How do you generate relative surplus value?
Primarily through technology and reorganizing production, making workers produce more in the same amount of time, speeding up the machines, improving efficiency, increasing the pace of work.
So it's a different way to get more unpaid labor out of the worker, even if the total hours are fixed.
Exactly. And this is where machinery really comes into its own for capital. It revolutionizes the production process itself. The worker increasingly becomes, in Marx's terms, just an appendage to the machine.
He talks about an inversion, doesn't he, where the machine dominates the worker.
Yes. The dead labor, the capital embodied in the machine, confronts the living worker as this dominant force, sucking out their living labor power. The worker becomes like part of an automaton, dictated by the machine's rhythm.
This must have caused huge conflict. The Luddites, for instance.
Oh, absolutely. Marx describes these early struggles as convulsions. Workers initially attacked the machines themselves, seeing them as the enemy.
But they learned to distinguish the tool from its use.
Eventually, yes. She argues they learned to direct their fight against the social form of exploitation, the capitalist system using the machines rather than the machines per se. Though, as the industrialist Orr apparently said, capital uses science to force the rebellious arm of labor to docility.
It's a bleak picture of control. And the general working and living conditions that resulted were just awful, based on the accounts in Capital.
Utterly deplorable. Take child labor. Marx documented the intellectual devastation it caused, even when laws mandated some basic education.
Manufacturers found ways around it.
They did, using subterfuges and tricks. He cites examples of children sent to schools where they learned absolutely nothing just to tick the box.
And safety.
Practically non-existent in many industries. The example of scutching mills for flax is horrifying accidents of terrible magnitude, workers literally torn apart. It often took decades and state intervention, legal coercion, to force basic hygiene measures, like simply lime-washing pottery factories to reduce dust.
The living conditions sound just as bad. Overcrowding.
Extreme overcrowding, lack of sanitation, men, women, children sleeping crammed together in single tiny rooms. He quotes reports describing 10 people in a 12 by 12-foot space. It wasn't just unhealthy. He argued it destroyed pudor and decency, leading to a breakdown of morality.
Are there specific examples of just how poor people were? Budgets and things?
Yes, he includes things like a Belgian workers' family budget from 1855. Even with 4 family members working, they ran an annual deficit. Their diet was worse than soldiers, sailors, even prisoners.
How did they survive?
By cutting back ruthlessly, reducing food rations, eating almost no meat or butter, cramming into 1 or 2 rooms, just sheer survival.
There's another example, isn't there? An Irish family.
Yes, a beetler's family from the 1860s. Father earning maybe 10 shillings a rent, mother 5 kids. Their diet was basically just porridge. Rarely tea, no meat, all sleeping together on straw.
And the key point here, as Dr. Simon observed at the time,
This wasn't poverty caused by laziness. This was not the deserved poverty of idleness. It is the poverty of the workers. People working incredibly hard, yet trapped in destitution.
Okay, so building on that grim picture, Marx then explains how capital itself grows. It's through reinvesting that surplus value, right?
Exactly. Capital accumulates by converting the more value, that unpaid labor, back into more capital. Buying more machines, more raw materials, hiring more labor power.
To generate even more surplus value.
It's a cycle. And Marx stresses that this additional capital created through accumulation contains not a single atom of value that does not derive from unpaid labor of others. It all originates from that exploitation.
This connects to another major concept, primitive accumulation. What was that about?
This was what Marx considered his other huge discovery, alongside surplus value. It addresses the question, where did the initial capital come from? How did capitalism even get started?
And the answer wasn't pretty.
Not at all. He argued it originated through the most brutal violence, robbery, and massacres. Think of the enclosure movement in England.
Kicking peasants off common land.
Precisely. Forcibly expropriating rural populations over centuries, creating a landless workforce with no choice but to sell their labor power in the cities.
He provides some stark historical examples of the violence involved.
He does. The vagrancy laws under English monarchs like Henry VIII and Edward VI. People who refused to work could be branded, enslaved, literally sold like property.
And laws actively preventing workers from organizing.
Yes, like the French decree in 1791 that banned workers' coalitions, calling them an attempt against liberty. The state actively intervened to create and discipline the new working class.
Marx also talks about a kind of internal conflict within the capitalist himself, the Faustian conflict.
Ah, yes. The tension between the drive to accumulate more capital and the desire to enjoy the wealth, the impulse for luxury.
Accumulation versus enjoyment.
Right. Initially, it might be pure enrichment and avarice, but later, as capital grows, spending on luxury becomes almost part of the representation costs of capital, a way of displaying success.
But the fundamental drive, especially as seen by classical economists,
was accumulate. That is Moses and the prophets. Marx quotes them, seeing the capitalist primarily as a machine for the transformation of this surplus value into more capital.
Okay, this relentless drive to accumulate, often using technology, inevitably displaces workers. What happens to them? This raises a really important question.
It does, and Marx's answer is that capitalism needs a pool of unemployed workers. It constantly creates what he called a relative surplus population or an industrial reserve army.
Why is that a necessity?
It serves several functions for capital. It keeps wages down because there's always competition for jobs, and it provides a flexible labor supply that capital can draw on during expansions and discard during downturns.
So unemployment isn't just a side effect, it's functional for the system.
That's his argument, and it refutes the idea common at the time of a fixed labor fund that determines wages. Marx said the amount of labor employed isn't fixed, it varies with the degree of exploitation.
And the attitude towards these displaced workers was pretty harsh.
Extremely harsh. Marx quotes the beau ideal of a capitalist basically telling the superfluous workers, look, we're creating capital, which you need to live. Now it's up to you to adjust your numbers to fit. A very cold perspective.
What was the reality for those workers pushed out by machines?
Often grim, Marx describes them as mutilated by the division of labor, meaning they were so specialized in one task that they couldn't easily adapt to other work. They often ended up in inferior, constantly saturated, and underpaid sectors. Many just couldn't make the transition and, as he put it, would languish and succumb.
This really underscores the antagonistic character of the whole system, doesn't it?
Absolutely. He points to earlier economists who saw this clearly, like Ortez saying the wealth of some equals the poverty of others, or Townsend, who actually praised poverty and hunger as necessary motivations for work.
Glorifying poverty is useful.
Yes. Making hunger permanent was seen as good for industry. And Marx concludes that even when wages do rise, the system ensures they stay within limits that allow capitalism to reproduce itself, and usually on an even larger scale. The fundamental antagonism remains.
So wrapping this all together, we've journeyed through Marx's view of how technology, labor, and capital are locked in this, well, really complex and often brutal relationship. It's a system that generates incredible productivity.
But also, as he meticulously documented, deep inequalities, exploitation, and real human suffering. His historical analysis, looking at things like the Factory Acts or workers' living conditions, it really brings that reality to life. It highlights this constant struggle over the length of the workday, the intensity of work, the very nature of work itself.
And understanding those historical dynamics, you argue, helps us see the patterns repeating today with AI and automation.
I think it does. It gives us a lens. The fundamental question isn't if technology transforms things. Of course it does. The question Marx pushes us to ask is transformation for whom? And under what conditions? Who benefits, who loses, and how is that shaped by the underlying economic system?
Right. And the source material we looked at does offer a provocative thought on that front. It suggests that only a different system, like socialism, could really harness automation to, say, free people from drudgery instead of just displacing them.
And could potentially redistribute wealth globally, tackle those environmental crises we touched on. That's the argument presented.
So that leaves a really crucial question for you, the listener, to ponder. As we stand here in what feels like another major technological revolution, what kind of societal changes might actually be needed to steer all this incredible productive power towards genuine human well-being and need, rather than just repeating those historical cycles of exploitation and accumulation that Marx described?